is the Anbernic RG35XX SP. Now with quieter buttons. So we are back with the Anbernic SP. I love this console. Took a look at it last week, and one of the things that was bothering me a little bit was the loud clicky buttons. Well, they're not so loud anymore. I've spent a bit of time investigating this, and I've got it to a point where I think it's just about right. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I've done it. Okay, so we're back with the Anbernic SP. I'm just calling it that for now because RG35XX SP just is too much of a mouthful. So the Anbernic SP again. I looked at this in my last video. I love it. I think it's a fantastic console, but the buttons were kind of loud and distractingly noisy. I've spent a bit of time investigating that and looked at a mod that people seem to be using that was done by Retro Handhelds. I will link that in the description. It is a very useful article, and I found it very helpful in giving me some starters on what to do here. But I didn't want this video to be just like me following someone else's guides, because there's other guides out there already that will show you what to do with this thing. I want to try and investigate it a little bit further. Tried various different things. To cut a long story short, I've used this stuff before. A self-adhesive felt that I got from Amazon. It just comes in like A4 sheets. You can get it in all sorts of different colors. The color doesn't matter in this case. It's going on the inside of the console. I bought it originally for like 3D printed casings that are done for consoles and just to line those so it didn't scratch the console. But I've ended up using it for various other things. It quietened down the buttons quite a bit on my Powkiddy RGB 350. Again, these console names do my head in. But anyway, yeah, the square screen one from Powkiddy that had like really rattly shoulder buttons, and I managed to quieten those down quite a bit. So I thought, rather than just do the same old thing, try something different. And I've done that, and well, what we got here works really well. The D-pad, face buttons, and menu button and start and select are now much quieter. They're actually less, or they feel like less effort to press the buttons. And if I put it right next to my microphone, I'm an idiot. I should have done like before and after. I even had like the scales ready for pressing the actuation and things, but I forgot to do that because I was giddy to get started on the mod. So I haven't got before and after, but trust me, like this is significantly better at this point here. So if I put it next to my mic, you might hear what I mean. So if I press like the A and B and the D-pad, start, select, menu. Now the A, B, X, Y, and D-pad in particular are much better. So I did look at the guide that explained about the fact that you put a layer of the tape over the buttons on the motherboard itself and then reassemble, and that kind of dampens that clickiness. But the thing you got to think about is, why is this happening in the first place? Well, first of all, it's got clicky buttons in there, so it will always be clicky. You're not going to eliminate that click anytime soon, but you can reduce the noise slightly. Noise is made by vibrations, and in particular with these sort of buttons, it's hard surfaces against one another that are making a lot of the noise. So if you can reduce the amount of hard surfaces that are coming in contact, you can reduce the amount of noise. So in addition to the kind of surface of the buttons and trying to dampen that and mute the sound from that a little bit, what I was thinking about was, every time you press a button on the handheld, you are pressing and releasing. So there is a noise made when you press down, but there's also a noise made when you release. And a lot of the time, that release noise is probably the louder part of the click, particularly if you're playing a game where you're like frantically click, 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 click. Every time you release, the top surface of the button piece is hitting against the lower surface of the shell. So I thought I might investigate trying to get something in between those. This isn't something completely original. When I've done a lot of work kind of taking apart PlayStation controllers, Xbox controllers, and so on the triggers, there's often like something to just dampen that movement on the release. When they've been damaged or they've been ended up being removed, those triggers are much louder. So that was kind of the theory behind this. So what I've ended up with now works really well. Before, when you shook the console, it rattled quite a bit. Now at the moment, it does rattle a little because I haven't done anything with the shoulder buttons. I'm maybe going to take a look at those because, again, if I'm kind of going like that, if I put that near the mic, particularly like the L2 and R2. The R1 and L1 aren't too bad. but the inner two are kind of a slightly loose fit, so they rattle around a bit. But if I cover those and I shake the console, there's no rattle at all. There is no noise. These buttons are in place, but in terms of movement, they're still comfortable to press. It doesn't feel like they're stiff to press. So we'll take a look inside and I'll show you what I did. To take it apart, this is where I started to fall out with Anbernic. Like, we've had years of all the main console manufacturers making it difficult to get into their stuff. But with the cheap Chinese products, usually it's been quite straightforward and it's just been crosshead screwdrivers. For some unknown reason, Anbernic have not only used a 1.5mm hex kind of screw inside there, but also they've set it really far in. So even with the right kit, I'll show you what I mean. So I've got my trusty little IKEA Trixig precision screwdriver kit. Love this thing. It's a really nice handle in particular. What I need is the hex 1.5, so the 1.5mm hex bit, and one of my crosshead ones, the PH00 will go with. Because these kind of get wider as they go up, it just about fits in. But it's ended up kind of rubbing out on these circles a little bit. Not too bad, but you have to be very, very careful that you're perfectly aligned. You get it in there and you're just careful on those first few turns while this kind of hexagonal area is in there. So I don't know why they've done that. And it is a bit annoying. At least I have got the right bits. And if you haven't got the right bits, well, you can get that set from IKEA. But trying to get the driver to bite on those screws in the first instance, you just have to be very careful that you don't scratch the plastic. Alternatively, you can just use like an Allen key. I have got like one of these is quite good. So this is one of the ones with like a ball end on it, like a ball socket. So you can kind of come in on a slight angle and get into the screw quite easily and undo that way. In particular, I mean, it's a bit unwieldy in general use, but it's quite good for just those first few turns if you can't quite get the precision driver in there. So anyway, yeah, that I wasn't particularly happy about. But if you've got the right screwdrivers, or if you've got an Allen key for getting in there, it's not going to be the end of the world. And I suppose more people have got Allen keys than have got things like the Torx security bit or the game bit that you get on like the Game Boy cartridges and things. So you know, it could be worse. So I'll swap over the bit to the crosshead because that's what we're going to need for the rest of the job, and undo the battery cover. Now with the battery cover, it's very similar to the Game Boy Advance SP. Just unscrew that a little more. That lifts out and the screw is kind of attached in there, so you're not going to lose it. Now removing the battery is not just a case of lifting it out like it is with the Game Boy Advance SP. If you've got it facing this way with the shoulder buttons upwards, something like a spudger to get in at the side and just lever it out is fine. And then carefully take the cable, and the cable will pull in that direction. You're going laterally. So just a gentle, careful pull, and that plug will come out. And then you've got to lift off this shell here. In this case, you can do all of this with the SD cards in, but maybe it's a good idea to remove those while we're doing all this stuff. And now we can get to the motherboard. There are 3 crosshead screws on there. I'm just going to undo those. There's a few buttons to get out of the way, and they're not too, they're quite nicely designed, I would say. The power and reset button just kind of lift out. It's a little assembly on a sprue. These have already got a little rubber backing on them, which does dampen the sound a little bit, so they don't need anything doing with them. And you don't press them often enough really to have any rattle issue that's going to bother you, and they don't rattle when you shake the console. Okay, so the shoulder buttons are kind of still a little noisy, particularly these two, because they're, as you can see, quite a loose fit. You can just knock those off there. But the mechanism for the R1 and R2 is actually really smart. Not like the original Nintendo SP where you had the little tiny coiled springs, or similar with the Nintendo DS. These are just simply a little pivot point quite far away from it there, like that, which just slots on. And these already have a little bit of rubbery contact point on the back, so that there's not too much of a click between this and the button component itself, which is inside the console there. But they are still a little noisy, so when we're putting all this back together, I'm going to just investigate what we can do to maybe quieten those down a bit too. But the main thing I want to show you is what I've already done on the inside. Quick look at this motherboard while we're here though. We've got a rumble motor built into it. That's where we've got the HDMI and the USB-C port. Both of our SD cards down here. We've got the headphone jack. We've got the 4 shoulder buttons and all the little surface mounted bits and pieces there, just if you were curious. And this is like, I think the CPU bit, which is where the battery sits directly on it. So things do get a little warm in there, but so far so good. Not really had any issues with that. I've tended to stick to a fairly low current when I'm charging, and it's not caused me any issues. This will lift out, but there is a ribbon attaching the screen, so it will kind of pivot up and around here, and then the ribbon is attached with a little clip, and if I just take my spudger, I'll be able to lift that up and the ribbon will just become disengaged. You can manage it with the ribbon still attached, but I wouldn't recommend it. Here's what we've got. So first of all, on the motherboard itself, now this is just like Retro Handhelds guide that I had followed. They suggested using squares of tape on the surface of the buttons. So I cut those out, stuck them on. It works. I didn't use tape. I used this self-adhesive felt on mine. And with the tape, the suggestions of using like a certain amount of layers on certain buttons, I've tried exploring different amounts, but really it works best with this stuff with just one. And also, given what I'd already done on the other side, there's a little bit more to it. When I did the menu button and the start select, those buttons are quite a bit smaller. So the felt overlaps them slightly and it kind of encases that sound a little bit better. With these, I did them smaller and the edge of the buttons are still visible. And I think some of the noise maybe still escapes a little bit more. So I'm going to make some slightly bigger squares to replace those. And in doing so, I'll be able to show you how I did it. Not that there's any particular cleverness to it, but just to show you how I went through that process. So I'll just remove the ones that are on there at present. And I'm doing some that are just ever so slightly bigger. So I measured and marked out a strip at the edge of the felt and then cut that out. I've tried with a knife, but scissors, absolutely fine. And then I'm just going to cut individual squares that are big enough to cover the buttons. So 1, 2, 3, 4 for the D-pad. 1, 2, 3, 4 for the face buttons. As I said before, using the tweezers and the spudger is a particularly helpful way of doing this. Once you've peeled the backing off, you can use the tweezers to handle it with one hand. Backing removed, tweezers just to get a little bit of a grip on it to help get it in place, and then the spudger to just help locate it in position. So I'll do that for the bottom there, and then tweezers on top, and then you can use a finger just to press down. I'm going to whiz through and do the rest of those and probably speed it up so you don't get bored rigid watching. So that's pretty much it in terms of that original guide I was talking about. And if you've got those squares on each of the buttons and you reassemble your console, you will be pleasantly surprised at how much quieter it is. However, as I say, the process of pressing the button is a down and up process, and it's often as it is released and the top of the buttons hit the shell that it causes you issues. This is where I get you onto my next phase of exploration, and I spent ages on this and tried it on various different buttons. First things first, with the start and select button and the menu button, the felt on the motherboard is absolutely fine. They're a slightly different type of button, and when I tried to put anything in for the release, it just jammed everything up, so leave those alone. But with the D-pad and the A, B, X, Y, what I wanted to do, if I just remove the membranes, interesting thing about the silicon membranes on this, they're identical. They're a standard part so that you can have them on either side. Right now, here we have my buttons, and you can see all these little stripes all over the place. So where the A, B, X, Y go in, each one has 3 little tabs to locate them in the right place to make sure you get the right button in the right spot. So if I just remove the one at the top there, okay, so you'll see it removed quite well. It wasn't like a tight fit or anything. So the X button there, so I'll get a bit of white behind there, you'll hopefully be able to see what I've done. So just like I had before with the long strip of the felt, what I did was I cut smaller little strips off, fed them into the gaps where those tabs go, and got them just sitting on the top surface, so not going into the edge, just on the top surface. I did it as a cross in the middle to get the top and bottom left and right of these gaps, then fed them in here and here just on the angle, and the rest of this surface doesn't matter too much. When I was doing that and I tested, they were still a little rattly because it was hitting on the edges. So what I did was I took another one and put it actually inside that circular area. So you'll see there I've got it just inside that bit, and once it was in there and pushed it in place with the spudger, folded it over, put it in place here. Did that with each button and it works really well. Like it's quietened it right down. So if I just pop that back in, we'll take a look at the D-pad next. D-pad was slightly trickier because there aren't those little tabs, and the amount of contact made on the D-pad, as you can see there, it's quite minimal, apart from these tiny little bits in the gaps. You can see what I've done there is I rested it just on that surface, on that inside corner, and then up and over the frame and out to the side. It was fiddly. It did take a while, and most people are not going to be interested in doing this just because of the amount of time it takes. Seriously, once you've done it, it makes a big difference. Even when I just dropped the D-pad in and just felt that movement, you can tell there's like no noise. That plastic on plastic contact has gone. It was fiddly. It did take quite a while. The general method, if I just show you what I did, you have the long strip and then you just use your scissors to just cut little strips at a time like this. And then when you've got those, peel the backing off them, grab them with the tweezers, just like I did with the bigger bits. As I say, you get the hang of doing the peeling fairly fast. You grip them with the tweezers. Now, because it's self-adhesive, once you've grabbed it with the tweezers, you can even like relax your grip on the tweezers. And you just kind of maneuver it into position. Once it's in position, use the pointed end of the spud just to just kind of press it down where you want it. And with a bit of patience, you'll get there. It does seem somewhat unnecessary. I don't know. I think it might be overkill for some people. But for me, just like it was nice when I dampened it and the click was quieter when I was pressing, but every time on that release I'd hear that click, and also when you shake the console there's still that rattle. So if I'm dampening it on both sides, I just figured that might improve things somewhat. So that's what I've got inside, and again, these membranes are interchangeable, so you don't have to worry about which one you've got on which side. If you have got the felt strips, or if you've got anything else in the way there, just make sure that when you're popping it back together you align everything in the right spot, because it's a little bit odd with the ABXY. D-pad fits quite well, but the ABXY, just make sure you've aligned that correctly. Now for the bit that I really hate is putting the ribbon back on. Make sure that the little latch is lifted up here. You don't have to actually hold the ribbon. I held the console in one hand, the motherboard in the other, with the motherboard kind of going past the outer of the shell, and just tried to align it and wiggle it until it moved into position. Hold that in place and flick down the latch. If you've got it right, you won't be able to see that white line. That seems to be fine. That seems to be in place. Again, I will check that my membranes are located in the right spot because I've just been lifting and moving the console. And then I will lower the motherboard in place. There are a few other buttons to get in position, but thankfully things like the power button and so on, you can put those in afterwards. You don't have to kind of have those balanced while you're moving the motherboard in. You put the motherboard in, then you drop those in. So that's some better design, I think. So we'll put the 3 screws back in. We've got plastic threads here. Follow the general rule of unscrewing until you feel it pop into its thread. Once it's located, it'll screw in. No problem at all. Don't over tighten it, just close it up until it stops. So I've got those 3 in place now. My other buttons, I've got my power and reset, which are both connected together, which makes them much easier to put in. You just drop them in on their side, wiggle them in until they sit in position. So for the volume, if you've got the HDMI and the USB at the top, that's where your triggers will go. So that's where your plus goes. That wider edge sits into the console like that, just to hold it in position. Line it up with the buttons and you are good to go. Now, as I said, the shoulders were kind of rattling ever so slightly. Not much from the R1 and R2, and there's not really enough movement for me to put some sort of felt on the inside edge there, because I want to have that press and release quite comfortable. But to minimize the rattle, I think if I put a little bit just on the underside of the bit where it says R1, we might be okay. So I'll give it a go before I try it on the R2 as well. I'll take that strip that I had earlier and just check the size of that. Width-wise, it needs to be trimmed down a little bit. So I'll cut off a whole section here and just trim that down a bit. Very easy to cut this stuff. And then where I want it to go, here on the underside of the button. So I just need to cut some smaller pieces off. and give it a try. I mean, the thing about this is it's not a permanent change, and you can leave it in there and it'll continue working. But if you don't like what you've done, or if it doesn't quite work, you can always peel them off and try it again, or try it a different way. If this doesn't work, I'll just take it off again. I'll get that in position there. Spud draw tweezers just to help get it into position. So that's just on the underside of where we've got R1 there. It might be no good, but it might be good. So we'll try that there, push it in. So the buttons still operate. That's visible from the underside there, which I don't really like. So maybe a slightly thinner piece would be better. So I've got that bit there, and then that will just sit in position here and hopefully just quieten it down. And if we look from this side, we can't see that strip too much. I think that might help. We'll see how it goes. I'll do the same on the other side, seeing as it was a success. I cut 2 of these little bits. Slide that in place there. Check everything seems okay. Seems all right. Now these buttons, now this is the bit that rattles around a lot. It is quite a loose fit, and as you can see, it just sort of sits in that gap there, and the back presses against here. It doesn't have that little bit of rubber on the back that the other bits have. So first thing I'm going to do is just put something on the rear of it to stop it from rattling around too much. That should still work. And straight away, it does fall out, but it's not rattling as much as it was. I think that should stop it from rattling around as much as it was. And then I'm going to do the same thing as I did on the R1 and R2 on the underside edge. I'm going to put a thin strip just to reduce the amount of these sort of hard surfaces coming in contact with one another. So I've stuck the little square in there. Next, I'm going to put a little strip here, just like I did on the other ones. So again, with the last bit of this strip that I cut off earlier. So to get the battery in, it's like a little 2-step process, you see, because the battery clip goes in here, but that goes on and it kind of feeds through. So what I found is if I take the rear shell, sit it kind of roughly here, like that, it allows me to line up the battery tab, carefully just locate that in position there, then put the rear shell in place. Now I might have to be quite careful of getting the triggers in place. Now they are feeling much less rattly already. Then the cable that attaches the battery, you'll see there's like a little gap in the corner there, so that needs to sit on there. That's in there, and then the battery will just sit flat. Battery cover, which goes back on here, and then back to our 4 little screws. So I'll just put the battery cover in, seeing as that's the driver bit that's in there already. Again, unscrew until you feel a pop, and then screw it in. And then the last bit, swap over my driver bit to the 1.5mm hex and just pop all these back in. Yeah, that can happen sometimes, and that's where you don't want it to leave like the little marks. It's just frustrating that it's so far in and it's the hex bit instead of a screwdriver, because a screwdriver, I don't know, would a screwdriver go a little further in? Not necessarily. It's a minor gripe, but I love my minor gripes. I do love finding fault with things. I can't help it. Let's get that screwed in there, and we are all back together. So now that it's together, just a little shake. It was rattling before on the shoulder buttons. They don't rattle. They do engage. And okay. So these two, they're not coming back out again. So I think I am going to have to remove the little bits from the bottom. I could cheat and try and get in and just get them out there, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to quickly open this up again and fast forward through the boring process. I'm thinking about it. If I'm only moving it a little bit, I might be able to lift it out without messing around with the battery. Yeah. So these were not kind of re-engaging, and I think it's this bit across the bottom was just that bit too much, unfortunately, because that would have quietened things down a bit. I'll try it without those, but keep the foam bit on the back of the button. It might be enough to make it worthwhile, and hopefully we don't have that rattle when we shake it. But at the same time, like, it's all well and good making it quiet, but if the buttons don't work, then the buttons don't work. This is proving a little tricky to get off, but not too bad. And the end of your spudger will help just remove these little sticky bits, and maybe just clean up with a microfiber cloth just to make sure there's nothing's going to end up getting gunk in it. That's all fine. Back as it was. That will just sit in position again. I'll keep the little square on the back. I think that is making a difference in terms of reducing the rattle. Now I'll lower the back on it again. Get all that clicked in position. Yeah, they don't rattle, so that's all okay. And we'll get our screws back in. Right, so looking at these, see if they work now. L1, R1 still good. L2, R2. They're a little loud on the release, but they don't rattle in the console, so that's good. And the face buttons, A, B, X, Y. There's a lot less pressure needed to actuate them, and particularly on that release, they're much quieter. So I'll just try it next to my microphone. Now remember, they are clicky buttons. They're still clicky components, so they will still click, but that kind of echoey rattle to it has got much better. They feel, dare I say, much more premium now without them kind of rattling around. When you run your finger across the surface like that, they sit nice and solid, but when you engage them, there's a definite engage and release. So it doesn't feel like it's gone all squidgy or anything like that. I think it feels absolutely superb. So before I test it, I've got to get my SD cards back in. Now, a quick look at those. I've got 2 of them. I got the 2 that came with it. So there's the Keynote 64GB one, which is for the actual system itself. Now, which way up do these go? Upside down, like that. And just click in place. So it's a spring-loaded mechanism in there. And then the other one is a memory card. That's like the brand. I think it says memory card. Yeah, so how long this one lasts me, I don't know. It seems to be all right so far. I was thinking about replacing it with a SanDisk one, but we'll see how we go. Now I'll switch on. Now I had a bit of a fright with this the first time I did it because I tried switching back on and it wouldn't come on, and I thought I'd ruined it from pulling the battery cable out. It turns out the battery was just flat and it needed charging, so that was a relief. So here we are with our newly modded Anbernic, I believe it is. I've been calling it Anbernic for ages, but I watched lots of other videos and people calling it Anbernic, so Anbernic, tell me which is the right one in the comments and I'll go with that. But you can see that none of those little bits of the black felt tape are visible here or on any of the other buttons on the outside. But if I go on a particularly clicky game, even navigating through the menus, I can really feel that difference. So let's say if I go on Neo Geo Magical Drop 3, I'll turn down the volume all the way and we'll start and just have a quick go and see how it feels. Playing this one in particular with the original setup was doing my head in a bit. Right, let's go. If you've never played this game, by the way, Magical Drop, it's really good. I discovered it on the Neo Geo Pocket Color. There's an excellent port for it on there. You don't need me to explain. It's kind of like a variant on Puzzle Bobble and Panga, maybe. I don't know, but it's a great game if you haven't played it before. That feels much better in terms of the amount of pressure I'm needing to apply on the buttons. In terms of the noise, particularly, like I say, if you're going on a game and it's like a click, 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 every release is loud. So it's like for every press, you've got 2 little clicks. Whereas now I'm literally just hearing the click on the downward press. Like it really is a significant difference. Thank you to Retro Handhelds for the idea with the tape. Hopefully my idea isn't overkill. I think it's made a significant difference. It is laboured and it is kind of fiddly, which is just my wheelhouse, really. I like kind of overdoing things. I popped out to try this yesterday thinking it was going to take about 20 minutes. 3 hours later, I'm still there cutting and trimming tiny bits of this felt stuff. The self-adhesive felt, I got it from Amazon. It's dead cheap. I'll leave a link in the description for that if you're interested in trying this out. If you have tried it, let me know how it went. I'd be interested to hear what you think. If you've done it with the tape, chances are it's going to be good enough anyway. But what I wanted to do with this video was, like I say, not just do what everyone else was doing. I wanted to try something else, whether it worked or not. Sometimes these things don't work, and if it doesn't work, I can tell you to avoid it. So it's still worth a try. So where it is at now, with the way the buttons work and all the other amazing things this does, it is just getting better and better for me. When I was initially trying it out, I liked it a lot. But the buttons were bothering me a little. Now they are much better. As I say, they feel a lot more premium without that kind of rattle on there. When my console is not in use, there's no rattle. When I shake it, there is not like I spend all my time shaking my consoles, but when you're moving it around or shaking it or anything like that, there's no rattle. Without that rattle, it does feel that bit more premium. I love how that has gone. I will be looking a little bit more into the possible options of what I can do in terms of customizing the software on it in another video in future. But for now, I mean, in terms of the hardware, I think this is perfect. Just perfect. I love it. I'm a fan of clicky buttons anyway. I just didn't like them being too clicky and noisy. The balance on this now is just right. I really, really like it. If you want to find out more about what I think of the console in general, I did do a quick review just recently. If you want to watch that, it should be up here for you. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video. Take care. Bye.